As we look at our lecture outline, we see that there are other types of organisms there. I don't want to say that these organisms are not important, but they are of lesser abundance and of lesser importance in the larger scheme of things than what the bacteria and fungi are. Now, one of those organisms, by type, are called the actinomycetes. Actinomycetes are an interesting group of organisms. They're very, very important in some soils in terms of the organic matter breakdown and cycling of nutrients. I kind of think of actinomycetes as being between bacteria and fungi in terms of size. Generally not as large as the fungi, but definitely larger than the bacterial single-celled organisms. They are thought to be predominantly single-celled, but they do have a larger, more filamentous type of body. Their quantity in the soil is typically less than it would be for the bacteria and fungi. Now, I mentioned that there could be as much as 1,000 pounds of bacteria in an acre 6 inches. The quantity of fungi in that same amount of soil would be comparable to the bacteria, meaning that we would expect somewhere in the range of around 1,000 pounds of these organisms in an top acre 6 inches of soil. These actinomycetes are very, very similar to the fungi in terms of their function and the role that they play in breakdown of organic material and release of nutrients for those plants. The last group of microorganisms, and these are predominantly microorganisms that I'll discuss here, are the algae. Now, if we think about algae, this is a good example of an autotrophic type of organism. Now, if you think back to our definition of autotrophic are those organisms that are self-sustaining. So what do algae do, or what can they do that bacteria and fungi can't do? Well, algae possess different types of pigments, forms of chlorophyll, for example. And we know that the higher forms of plants utilize that pigment to capture the energy from light. So algae have the same ability. They are self-sustaining because they can make their own food, and they obtain their energy or their nutrients from an inorganic source. Why do I mention them here when we're talking about organic matter in the soil and cycling? Because these algae in some soils will live on the surface and become an important part of that organic matter cycle. Because they require light for growth and development, they're obviously going to be at the surface of the soil. But they can live, they can grow, they can reproduce, they can multiply in number, especially on soils where surfaces remain wet for extended periods of time. They like high moisture environments. And they themselves, as they die and decompose, become a part of that organic matter cycle in the soils. Well, that completes our discussion, at least initial discussion, on these microscopic forms of plant life which exists in the soil. The fungi, the bacteria that we've discussed, the actinomycetes, and the algae. What we're going to be doing next is looking at some higher forms of life in the soil, and we're going to be talking primarily about soil animals. So we're switching gears here a little bit, and the next lecture will be on the soil animals, the different types of animals that exist. Some of these are microscopic, and some are macroscopic. Actually, many of these are macroscopic. And we'll discuss their role and importance they play in the organic matter cycle in the soil.